Hello everyone, welcome to the webinar. I'm your presenter Akriti Jain from MeetUniversity.com, and today we are going to talk about our two major competitive tests, GRE and GMAT, and basic differences between the two. Moving with GRE at a glance, GRE, that is Graduate Record Examination, it is a standardized test that is an admission requirement for most graduate schools. It is created and administered by Educational Testing Services (ETS) that began in 1949. GRE is offered year-round and tests the potential graduate students in four areas: verbal reasoning, quantitative reasoning, and critical thinking and analytical skills. Test takers receive three scores, one each for verbal reasoning, quantitative reasoning, and analytical writing. It is primarily a computer-based test, and if the computer-based is not available, it can be given on paper as well. The test cost is $195 worldwide. You can also take GRE subjects test, and that is available in 8 different subjects: biology, chemistry, physics, biochemistry, cell and molecular biology, mathematics, computer sciences, literature in English, and psychology. They are offered at paper-based test centers in April, October, and November, the cost of which is $130 in US and US territories and $150 elsewhere in the world. In the graduate school's admission process, the level of emphasis that is placed on GRE scores varies widely between the schools and between the department within the schools. The importance of GRE score can range between just being a admission formality, or it could be an important selection factor. The GRE was significantly overvalued in 2011, resulting in an exam that is not adopted on a question by question basis but rather by sections. So that the performance on the first verbal and math sections determine the difficulty of the second sections presented. Overall, the test retained the sections and many of the question type from its predecessors, but the scoring scales were changed to 130 to 170 scales from 200 to 800 scale. Field-wise distribution of GRE test takers. The format followed for exam delivery is section adapted examination. For both the verbal and quant portions of the test, you will take two separate sections. Your performance on the first section of each type will determine the difficulty level of the second section that you receive. Sections and allotted timings. There are two sections for 30 minutes each of the essay section. There are two verbal sections, 30 minutes each. There are two mathematics sections, that is again 35 minutes each. And the scoring is one essay section will be scored on the scale of 0 to 6. One verbal section will be scored on the scale of 130 to 170, and one mathematics section will be scored on the scale of 130 to 170 again. Moving on to GMAT, the Graduate Management Admission Test is a computer adaptive test, that is CAT, intended to access the certain analytical writing, quantitative, verbal, and reading skills in written English for use in admission to a graduate management program such as MBA. The GMAT does not measure business knowledge or skill, nor does it measure intelligence. According to a test owing company, the GMAT accesses analytical writing and problem solving ability while also addressing the data sufficiency, logic, and critical reasoning skills that is believed to be vital to the real world business and management success. The GMAT test verbal, math, analytical, and interrogative reasoning skills in four sections: analytical writing assessment, quantitative, verbal, intuitive reasoning. Test takers receive 5 scores, one for each section plus a total score. You will also receive a percentile rank for each score. Then you will know the percentage of the test takers in the past 3 years who receive a lower score. The cost of the test is $250 around the world. Format for exam delivery is computer adapted exam. That means questions get harder as you get more correct, and easy as you get more incorrect. There are three sections: two 30-minute essay section, one 75-minute math section, and one 75-minute verbal section. And the GMAT scoring is one essay will be scored on a scale of 0 to 6. One verbal will be scored on a scale of 200 to 800, and mathematic combined score will be scored on a scale of 200 to 800 again. Now, moving ahead to the difference between the two, and first of all, understanding the scores. Both the GRE and GMAT use a adopted exam format, although in a slightly different ways. The computer adopted format on GMAT chooses each question based on your performance on the previous questions, meaning you must answer each question in order to move ahead, and you cannot skip question or you cannot go back to your prior question. The GRE is a section adopted exam. Your second section of verbal and maths adopt or become harder or easier depending on your overall performance in your first section of verbal and maths respectively. That means you cannot skip questions or you cannot move around within a section much as you can or more traditionally in a paper-based examination. The GRE gives three different scale scores on quant score reports on a 130 to 170 score scale in 1 point increment, a verbal score reported on 130 to 170 score scale in 1 point increment, and analytical writing score reported on a 0 to 6 scale in half-point increment. The GMAT provided four separate scores, a quantitative scores on a scale of 0 to 60 in 1 point increment, a verbal score on a scale of 0 to 60 in 1 point increment, a total score on a scale of 200 to 800 in 10 point increment, and analytical writing score reported on a 0 to 6 scales in half-point increment. For the GMAT, the quantitative and verbal sections are section scores, and these two sections scores are combined to create a total score. The total score is the most familiar to GMAT test takers, that is given on the famous 200 to 800 scale, where 200 being the lowest and 800 being the highest. It is similar to the SAT scores, which many people encountered while in high school. Moving ahead to the time scheme, GRE, the total time is 3 hours and 45 minutes. It has two 30 minutes essay sections, two 30 minutes verbal sections, and two 35 minutes math section. GMAT, the total time is 3 hours 30 minutes. It has two 30 minutes essay section, one 75 minutes math section, and one 75 minutes verbal section. Now, the question arises, where will you be able to perform better? After knowing the fact, the big question is which test will make it easier for you to get into your desired program? Well, GMAT is the standardized test for MBA admission and is considered the tougher test. So, all things being equal, a great GMAT score always beats a great GRE score. Actually, you would be relatively safe in assuming that you would be able to perform similarly on each test. The general thinking that has been that if you are unevenly talented at verbal, then it is easier to earn higher marks on GRE. This is still somehow true, but the GRE verbal has gotten less dense and more GMAT. Like while the quant has gotten more far challenging, giving less advantage to verbal. And let's face it, some school want to see you showcase your quant skills so that if you have mostly non-math oriented work experience or non-math oriented undergraduate degree, it may be important to face the rigor of the GMAT quant. Then looking at it from the GRE versus GMAT problem solving techniques, the fundamentals that you need for each test are almost identical. And from easy to medium level questions, the tests are somewhat similar in difficulty. Yes, GMAT presents more puzzles on all levels and GRE presents more straightforward maths test. But the big divergence is in the top shelf of the questions of the GMAT. The GMAT could hit you with a question that regardless on how much time you have leaves you completely stunned. For most people who are good at maths, this DN highlights movement is unlikely to happen on the GRE. The GRE flattens out quickly. The other thing to consider is the group of people who are taking GMAT probably has a better quant skills as compared to the group of people who are taking GRE. So a person with weaker quant skills could achieve a better percentile on GRE than on the GMAT. While the better percentile isn't necessarily meaningful, it might look better on the application. Bottom line is GRE problem solving is on average easier than GMAT problem solving. And on the GRE, it may be easier to snag a high percentile. An apt comparison might be between ACT and SAT, that in the GRE is closer to ACT, less time for more questions that cover similar context, but are on an average easier. Then comparing it from on a viewpoint of GRE QC versus GRE DS. For most people, beginning their GMAT saga, the most feared section is data sufficiency. That makes a lot of sense, as the question type is unique to the GMAT and as slippery as uninitiated. For many people, data sufficiency requires a quagmire, hit or miss questions type throughout GMAT preparation and right on through the examination. Why? Because you solve not for exact answers, but whether you have enough information to solve. Because the answers are not actual solutions, it is tougher to get detect the rotten logic. The GRE response to data sufficiency is quantitative comparison, QC. I'm just I'm just going to say it up front. QC, that is quantitative comparison, is easier than data sufficiency. So although quantitative comparison seem similar to data sufficiency questions, the idea of comparing the two sides of the two piles should be fairly similar to most people right from the get-go. The other thing is that makes QC easier is that you only have four answer choices. That's right. So 1 by 4 on a guess. Then moving ahead to GRE and GMAT reading comprehensions. Versus the GMAT, the GRE used to have much denser and longer passages. In its newest iteration, the GRE has trended closer to GMAT with shorter, less dense passages paired with tricky questions. This makes more considering that the GRE wants to appeal on an international entrance examination for business schools and probably wants to avoid scaring off international candidates. So, is there any easy way out for reading comprehension? I don't think so. Nowadays, the difficult level is very easy on both tests. The real difference is that you can skip around on GRE as opposed to GMAT, which only allows you to see one question at a time. Then we have GRE sentence completion versus GMAT sentence correction. These sections are extremely different, but both being the odd man out in the GRE versus GMAT debate. I pitted them against each other. If you have strong vocabulary, the completions will be relatively simple. There isn't much critical thinking there. Um, it's just about memorized words. As silly as it may seem, these questions are about memorizing vocabulary. If the memorization isn't your thing, then, or if you do not already have a broad vocabulary, you may have an easier time learning the logic of the GMAT sentence correction. It is unlikely that you will be good at one and not other, but I would probably place myself in the category. Then moving on to GRE versus GMAT critical reasoning. You will most likely have have two pure critical reasoning questions on your GRE, so versus the GMAT critical thinking. The GRE critical reasoning is lightweight. I would place the GRE critical reasoning question somewhere around mid levels GMAT critical reasoning questions. If critical reasoning is a strength, that then you can go for GMAT. Those CR skills will most likely translate to a reading comprehension as well and contribute to excellent verbal scores. If you adore critical reasoning, then GRE might be great ways to avoid these guys. Not that you can't train critical reasoning, but it does take some time and effort to do so. Then moving on to GRE versus GMAT structure. The GMAT CAT can feel very threatening and certainly imposes some practical challenges. You can't skip questions, you can't go back to questions if you have um, some ones to do it later on the examination. You can't see what questions are coming up. You don't know exactly what is the mix of questions will be. If you keep answering correctly, these tests keep on getting harder. Contrast to this is GRE, which allows you to complete freedom to move around, is barely adopted and even permits you a calculator. GMAT integrated reasoning or essay versus GRE. The GRE has no section which compare the integrated reasoning sections of the GMAT. So does the integrated reasoning factor into this GRE versus GMAT discussion? I would not say, I would not prefer it very much. Although it may be an important element at some point in the future, it doesn't seem to be extremely relevant to the current admission decisions. The same can be said for the essays. Moving on to verbal questions, two of the three GRE verbal question format, text completion and sentence equivalencies test your vocabulary in very direct way. If you don't like words, the GRE verbal will be tough for you. This is an important difference. Students with strong vocabularies are not necessarily students with strong grammatical skills and vice versa. Consider your strength when making your decision about which exam to take. The GRE verbal section involves a lot of vocabulary recall, while GMAT verbal requires a bit more of reasoning. Moving on with the mathematics question, each exam showcases oddball math questions format. The QC format of the GRE and the data sufficiency format of the GMAT will take some getting used to. Plan to invest some time in learning appropriate strategies and approaches. Those categories are very broad. In reality, anything up to but not including trigonometry is fair game on in their exam. Things not included are trigonometry, algebra 2, calculus. Though the um, content tested is the same, the GMAT math section is definitely more difficult both in terms of level of questions that appear on the exam and the scoring scale. GMAT math question requires more sophisticated reasoning skills than do the GRE math question. Be careful though, don't think that you can avoid studying math by opting for a GRE. GRE math skills require a sophisticated sense of numbers and ability to solve problems. So, just in order to summarize the difference, if you want to apply to a business schools and you don't want to take a GMAT, you may be in luck. More than 1200 MBA programs now accept GRE, that is GRE General Test in lieu of GMAT for admissions, and that means more options for you. Admission trends to trends are showing that business schools are looking for applicants with more than just a background and experience in business, and that means with a GMAT is not the only test in the game anymore. Before you choose the test, you should find out the schools you're applying and you're looking for, and from there the call is up to you. So just in order to summarize the difference, GMAT and GRE are very different tests, but they have one thing in common. No matter which test you decide upon, you will need to prepare if you want to get a good score that admission officers can't ignore. Once you'll pick the test you want to take, your next step is to choose how you want to prepare for it. To help you compare the differences between these, check out the handy chart on your screen. Um, why take it? The test is required for admission to most graduate schools and growing number of business schools. Is for GRE. For GMAT, the test is required for admission to most of the business schools. The test structure for GRE, it consists of 60 minutes analytical writing skill with two essays at 30 minutes each. There is a verbal reasoning section also with two 30 minutes part. There are two 35 minutes quantitative reasoning sections. There are also 30 to 35 minutes experimental section that can either be math or verbal. In GMAT, the GMAT consists of a 30-minute analytical section with one essay, a 30-minute integrated reasoning section, a 75 minutes quantitative section, and 75 minutes verbal section. And both of the scores are though valid for 5 years. There are some considerations which you need to take and which you need to keep in mind while you are preparing for your GRE and GMAT examination. With this, I'll end this presentation. I hope the information provided will be critically useful in deciding upon which examination to appear for your right kind of course and for the right kind of university. Thank you everyone for listening to me today. I'm signing off, your presenter Akriti Jain.